There is a strange thing that I hear a lot of Christians say, and it is said in different ways. I've heard some people say it like this: once persecution comes, the church will be cleaned out and will really start to grow. Others say it this way: if we were living under persecution, you wouldn't see this rubbish in the church, we'd be in a really good place. Still others chime in with this: I can't wait for the church to face tougher times or persecution, because then we will really see what Christians are made of. Setting aside the rather morbid desire to see people suffer, the general premise is this: persecution will strip the church of excess baggage and will help it grow into what it should be. I want to challenge the idea that we need persecution for the church to grow for this reason. The Bible does not teach that we need persecution to grow the church. The Bible does say that Jesus will build his church and the gates of hell will not stop it. The Bible does teach that for the individual believer, suffering or hard times can grow us if we respond to them in faith. As Paul says, suffering produces perseverance, perseverance produces character, and character hope. The Bible does teach that hard times can reform and refine God's people. It even teaches that during the Great Tribulation, God will still be bringing people to faith. But it does not say God can only grow his church if it is being persecuted. So if the Bible does not teach that we need persecution for the church to grow, then why do so many people believe this is true? For a couple of reasons. Most Christians are aware that the early church faced persecution under the Romans and still grew to eventually overtake the whole Roman Empire. Scenes of lions feeding on helpless but defiant Christians in the midst of colossal stadiums fills people's minds. What many people don't realize is that the Roman persecution was not sustained and sometimes did not even extend throughout the whole empire. Yes, Christians were killed in Rome by Nero, but this was a localized persecution in an empire that spanned from France to Judea. There were empire-wide persecutions, particularly in the late 3rd and 4th century, but these were a response to the ever-growing presence of Christianity, not the cause of it. I don't want to diminish the suffering of those who were persecuted. I am simply showing that Christianity did not need persecution to grow. These scenes of persecution were brought down to us in modern times by the tireless works of people like John Foxe and other church writers. Foxe's Book of Martyr recounts how brave Christians had perished at the hands of first pagan and then Catholic tormentors, and how this had not stopped the church growing. Even before him, the early African church father Tertullian is quoted to have said this: the blood of martyrs is the seed of the church. His view was that persecution actually strengthened the church, just as Foxe was implying by his work, and as many Christians today believe. People are supported in this belief by a cursory glance at China, where it seems that whatever the communist government tries, the church continues to grow. But Tertullian was not completely right, and I've already given a hint as to why. When people think of North Africa today, think Libya, Egypt, Algeria, Tunisia, Morocco. They will think this: those are all Muslim nations, indeed heavily Muslim. But this wasn't always the case. The whole of North Africa was once Christian. In fact, it was a hub of intellectual Christian thought. In fact, no less famous a theologian than Augustine was from North Africa. But now, after sustained persecution, North Africa is almost completely Muslim and has been this way for centuries. The same is true of Turkey and much of the Middle East, Syria, Lebanon, Judea, which we now call Israel. Even the outer limits of Arabia and Yemen were once Christian provinces and kingdoms. Even old Saint Nick, upon whom the myth of Santa is based, was from a city called Myra in Asia Minor, a place we now call Turkey. In fact, Istanbul was once Constantinople, the jewel of the Eastern Roman Empire, and once considered the chief of all Christian cities. Its greatest church, Hagia Sophia, became a mosque after the Muslim conquest and is now a museum. Constantinople once held the same place in the ancient church and Western world that Rome held in the glory days of Julius Caesar's Rome. Now, it's a Muslim city, and not even the jewel of the Muslim world. And Christians are rarer in Turkey than decent people in Hollywood. In fact, according to Christianity Today, the places where the church is growing the fastest in the world do not necessarily correspond with government and social persecution. So clearly, the blood of the martyrs is not always the seed of the church. So if it is not the lack of persecution which is stopping the church from growing in the West, then what is it? Well, let me answer that question with some other questions. When was the last time you shared the gospel with someone? Do you have any people on your prayer list who are unbelievers that you pray for, no matter how unlikely it looks that they will believe? When was the last time you were generous with someone, not because you had to be, but because you could be? How much of your life is filled up with so much busyness that you have no time to teach your kids about the faith, or serve in your church, or join some outreach activities? How many of you select your church because of what it can offer you, not because of what you can offer it? I think the reason the church is struggling to grow in many parts of Australia is not because we are not persecuted, but because we are collectively lazy in fulfilling the Great Commission to make disciples. There are still people coming to faith in Australia. I have seen a few in just the last year myself, and I know others who have seen more. Largely where they are, it is because people have been witnessing, being generous, sacrificing some of their time, and praying for people, among other things. In other words, what it takes for the church to grow is for people to obey Jesus' commands and seek to make disciples. Even if we do it poorly, he'll step in and blow you away by how he works. Indeed, even Christianity today points out that that is why Christianity grew in ancient Rome. It was not the persecution which grew the church. The more significant factor was the Christians' compassionate acts, such as rescuing abandoned infants and caring for the sick and elderly. Even the Roman Emperor Julian noted, "The impious Galileans support not only their own poor, but ours as well." What grew the church was the Christians' desire to be faithful to Christ's mission. The church can grow in persecution. It can also grow when the church is not being persecuted. The Great Awakenings in England and America in the 18th century are evidence of this. When the church will always struggle is when we don't take Jesus' commands seriously and get out and test his promise that he is with us. I am convinced that we don't need persecution for the church to grow in Australia. What we need is people to get out of their little bubbles and into their communities, share the gospel, and do the good works of the gospel. If you do this out of faith, you will eventually see God work in powerful ways. I know I have. Don't you want to see what our great God can do?